bring in a number of topics which are typically not covered in the Indian ecosystem, topics like ethics, etc. So keep in touch with us on these issues, and we would like to keep you updated on the next series of programs. With that, let me introduce Professor Rishikesha Krishnan. Professor Rishikesha Krishnan is the director of IIM Bangalore. He is a professor of innovation and strategy, and he's also the co-author of several books on innovation and strategy. With that, I request Professor Rishikesha to give the welcome address, and then we'll hand over this floor to Alex.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Venki, and I'm delighted that we are here together today to listen to Alex Osterwalder. I can still remember the first time I saw the Business Model Generation book many, many years ago. I was really impressed by the way it was produced, by the content, of course, by the very interesting contemporary examples, and basically by its user friendliness. And ever since, it's been one of my favorite books. I ordered multiple copies and gave them to my friends. And of course, I've used it in my class as well. So it's really wonderful that we are here with Alex today. Of course, Alex has not restricted himself to the business model canvas. He's gone well beyond that into a lot of other issues. And today he's going to be talking to us about invincibility. That sounds a little challenging to me, but I'm sure knowing Alex, he'll make it something really interesting. Today in India, we are really at the crossroads as far as business and enterprise development is concerned. We have a whole lot of important programs started by the government, including one under the name of Atmanirbhar Bharat, where we are trying to make Indian organizations that can make for India and make for the world at the same time. Of course, we also have several challenges because the recent COVID crisis has sort of given our economy some pretty hard blows, and we have to recover from that. But I'm sure many of the ideas that Alex will speak about today will be very helpful. The good news is that we have lots of good entrepreneurs, both of small and large enterprises. Indian entrepreneurship has always been one of the strong points of our country. And I'm sure with the right ideas and just building on the great entrepreneurial spirit, Indian entrepreneurs will be able to build back the Indian economy, not only to what it was before, but to much more. So let me once again welcome all of you on behalf of all the institutions collaborating today, but I'm not going to speak for long. I think the person we are here to listen to is Alex Osterwalder, and I'm really looking forward to hearing him. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rishi. With that, I would like to request Alex to take over the stage.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about the Invincible Company, which, as we just heard, right, sounds like a very challenging topic, actually a little bit of an arrogant title. But the point is that no company can be invincible. The only thing you can do is constantly reinvent yourself. So when we published this new book, it was based on, you can see, welcome to my office behind me, we make visual books. We looked at the different companies in the world to see which ones outcompete and why. And very, very clearly what stood out is that companies that constantly reinvent themselves, they can stay ahead. And the point is that you reinvent yourself while you're successful, because when it's a crisis, it can often be too late. Right? Think Kodak, right, as one of our favorite examples, or many, many out there now, in particular hit by COVID-19. What you can see is companies that have put in place a structure to reinvent themselves, they're more resilient. So second piece here is that great companies compete not just on technology innovation, not just on products, not just on service, not just on price, but they build superior business models in which technology, product, service, and price are embedded. And the last one, I'd say this is actually a very challenging one, they break out of industry boundaries. So the really successful companies, you can less and less classify them in an industry. And I'll talk about it in a second. But right now, we might not want to talk about invincible companies, but about resilient companies. Companies that can deal with uncertainty and shocks. Obviously, kind of hard to deal with a shock as big as COVID-19, but with disruption in general, more regular business disruption that happens maybe every 5, 10 years or so, and getting faster actually. Now, what's the challenge to establish companies is that all interesting things happen at the edges of the system. So this is today an advantage for the startups, disadvantage for established companies, but it's actually rapidly changing. And I'll give you an old example first, right, to get us warmed up. So you remember maybe the computer industry many, many decades ago, Compaq and so, and it got disrupted by a kid in the dorm room, right? So we've all heard of the story of Dell, really old one, but still think of it. Just think what happened. A kid in a dorm room disrupted a multi-billion-dollar business. So you'd say, well, okay, that was a long time ago. Companies are now prepared for this kind of stuff. Well, let's look at the car industry. We're still making the same mistakes in established companies that lead to disruption from insurgents. So if you take Tesla, right, interesting example these days, it's not just a car company, actually. They broke out of the industry boundaries with electric vehicles at the center, but it's actually a lot more. Just think of it, what they're trying to build. They already are looking at top tiles to collect the solar energy, put it into batteries so you can charge your car. And if you really want to go deep into Tesla, it's a lot more of a data company and software company than a car company. So this is interesting to look at. And the question is, how can established companies do the same thing? Or maybe even ask the question, is this just for startups, or can established players do the same thing? One of my favorite examples at the moment is Ping An, which you might have heard of, a Chinese conglomerate, because they started out in banking and insurance, and they broke out of that because the founder, Peter Ma, said, we are going to get killed, disrupted by technology players. And they started investing in different arenas, really build this kind of invincible company. And today they run some really interesting platforms like Ping An Good Doctor, which is the biggest health platform on the planet, 300 million users. Think of it, as a Swiss, I'm asking, why can't our banks, UBS and Credit Suisse, do this? Or our pharmaceutical companies like Novartis and Roche? Because they confine themselves to an industry and they don't yet have the capability to break out of those industry boundaries. But it's happening. It's changing very quickly. So the agenda for today, for the next maybe 50 minutes, is first I want to show you how established companies, small and large, can manage an innovation portfolio. Then a little bit scratching on the surface of how to design and test business models. And I'm going to talk about the business model patterns. And the last one, how do we establish an innovation culture? So we're doing a kind of a survol in French, we say, of these three topics that are in the book. Now, I want you to already grab a pen and paper or a tablet, because I'm going to get you to do some exercises in a minute, okay? So this is not just going to be a talk shop. I want to make it a little bit of a workshop, okay? So I'm going to show some stuff, and I'm going to get you to work as well to keep it interactive. So the challenge here is that most established companies have a hard time doing both of these things. Managing the existing, we call this exploit, where uncertainty is relatively low because you know the customers, you know the value propositions, you know most of the factors. When it comes to exploration, you're going into new areas, it's a lot harder because uncertainty is high. So how do you do both things at the same time? Because the logic between these two worlds are very different. On the right-hand side, here we look at efficiency. Here we look at breakthrough new growth. As I said before, uncertainty on the right-hand side is a bit lower. On the left-hand side, it's very high, which means that even the financial philosophy needs to be different. Here, we can make sure investments and expect a guaranteed return. Over here, we're talking more of risk capital, so we need a different way to invest in ideas and projects, which leads to culture and processes. Very different on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side. One is about managing, the other one is about entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, innovation. And the last piece here, we're more clearly seeing, this is the domain of managers, and incremental innovation to improve what you have, this is the domain of explorers, of entrepreneurs. So even the profession, I would say, is very different. And we need to accept them as different professions because you can learn to become a great innovator and great entrepreneur. And being a great manager doesn't necessarily qualify you to be a great innovator. Could be, but it's not always the case that you have both skills. So what I'm going to do with you is the first exercise. It's going to take 2 minutes. I want you to classify a couple of topics that I'm going to give you into, is this more exploration, innovation? Does this go more in there? Does it go more in managing the existing businesses where you have relatively low uncertainty, or does it go into both categories? It's exploit and explore. Okay, so topics are embracing failure, dividends, financial dividends, predictability, iterative processes, financial targets, risk reduction, innovation, rapid decision making, and linear processes. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to put them into the right categories. So you don't need to put them onto the chat window yet. So here, just classify them on a piece of paper. Where would you put them? Okay, time is running. And I put a couple of trick questions because otherwise it would be too easy. Let's see where you would put these. Is this more exploration or is it more managing the existing, exploitation? And I like to do this with managers and senior leaders around the world to warm them up to this topic, exploiting what we have and inventing the future. Okay, when you're done, yeah, great. That's great. When you're done, you can just type done in the chat window. That gives me a bit of an idea how we're making progress. Okay, got 1 minute left. We're going to do a couple of these little exercises throughout the 50 minutes to make it more interesting to listen to me, to keep you activated. Great, people are participating. We have about 60 people who are done. And anybody who's not working is not trying to grow personally and professionally. And you'll get used to my bad jokes. Okay, and let's give it another 10 seconds. Got quite a few coming in. Great that you're participating. Awesome. Love it. Because this is not just a talk shop. It's a little mini workshop, right? Okay, so I'll show you what I came up with. I put financial targets in the middle. So some of you might have put them on the right, but we actually have different financial targets on the right-hand side. It's quarterly targets, results that we need to deliver that we can predict. On the left-hand side, you have a portfolio of projects and you expect a return on portfolio. And I'll go into that a little bit later. Dividends, clearly on the right-hand side, we expect them, they're predictable. Rapid decision-making on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, because we're talking big investments, we might take more time. It's irreversible decisions, right, when we build new factories. Innovation, I put it in the middle because we have different types of innovation. We have efficiency innovation, improving processes on the right-hand side, and we have more transformative innovation, building new growth engines, new business models on the left-hand side. Embracing failure on the left-hand side. You experiment, you fail, you learn, you adapt. On the right-hand side, you're managing a supply chain, no failure permitted, okay? So different logic on the left-hand side, right-hand side. Predictability, possible on the right-hand side, much less on the left-hand side. Risk reduction, I'm sure a lot of you put it maybe more into innovation. I'll put it in the middle because we have different types of risks. On the right-hand side, you have the risk of an established business being disrupted. You need to manage that. On the left-hand side, you have innovation risk. The risk of investing in a bad idea that's going to fail, okay? And then the last two were easy. Iterative processes, a lot more on the left, and more linear processes because they're predictable on the right. Even if we're getting more agile across the board, there's more linear on the left-hand side because there's more predictability. Okay, so that was just to warm us up to this topic of explore and exploit. Now let's dive into innovation. And the first thing I want to clarify, that innovation alone means nothing. When you say, oh, everybody needs to be an innovator, I don't know what you mean. We need to talk about 3 types of innovation, and I shamelessly steal this from Clay Christensen, 3 categories. The first one, efficiency innovation, making things better that you have in your existing business model. If we're Amazon, that means robots, that means artificial intelligence in our warehouses. It can be extremely complex, but it's about making better what you have. And I like to say, if efficiency innovation is all you're doing, you're going to more efficiently die with a dying business model. However, don't get me wrong, you need to do it. It's important. I'm not saying you shouldn't do this. It's just not enough. Then we need to invest in sustaining innovation, new product services, new value propositions that replace old ones. Doesn't give you substantial growth. If you have a new car model, it will just replace the old ones. Digital transformation, often, investing in new channels, it's what everybody is doing. It's just keeping you in the game. Now that's important. I would take for Amazon, that was the Kindle. And then the interesting category that we're going to focus on most, because it's the hardest, transformative innovation, completely new growth engines, new value propositions for new markets, new business models. For Amazon, that was clearly Amazon Web Services. Think of it. A book retailer originally is now one of the biggest infrastructure providers in the world, okay? Because they had this mindset of investing in different types of innovation. Now, here's what I like to do when I work with boards, when Strategyzer works with boards and senior leadership. I do this very simple exercise, very powerful. I suggest you do it. I ask them, I have 20 people in a room, 30 people in a room. I ask them to write down on a sticky note their 5 favorite innovations onto a sticky note from the last 3 to 5 years. Okay, so they write down these sticky notes. What was the favorite innovation at their company? Okay, at their company. And then I ask them to put them into these 3 buckets. So I put up on the wall or on a window, I put these 3 buckets, and they ask them to classify the sticky notes. Where do you think most of the sticky notes go? Of course, on the right-hand side, right into efficiency innovation. And often, one airline we worked with, they got a lot of prizes for doing great innovation, but it was just, and I'm just in quotes, efficiency innovation. That's important, but it's not enough. So then I would ask questions. Oh, what about this one? Oh, maybe it goes here. I ask about this one. They say, oh, that's just an idea we have. And then I say, well, if it's just an idea, then you don't have it yet. It's not a transformative innovation yet, right? It's an idea. So what we end up with is an image that looks something more like this. Now, I think it can be fine if a company wants to invest just in efficiency innovation. That's okay. Unfortunately, this is not always or rarely a deliberate choice. What companies think they're doing is this, this, and this, and they don't realize it. So when I work with leadership, I get them to visualize this so they can make a deliberate choice. And it's rarely the case that they don't want to do this. It's just not very apparent that they're not doing it, because often we use blockchain, we use artificial intelligence, very complicated, complex technologies here. So we think we're inventing the future, but all we're doing is making our existing and often dying business model more efficient. Think of the banking industry, think of pharmaceuticals. It's changing in that industry. So the same business model will not get you into the next century or next decade. The last piece as introduction I would want to emphasize is, let's not fall in love with technology. While technology is a great enabler and can be the foundation of innovation, what we really do in innovation is create value for customers and value for our organizations. That's a much larger domain than technology innovation. And technology may or may not be a driver. Let me give you an example. Think of it. Maybe type into the chat window. What was a company that disrupted an entire industry with inferior technology? When they launched the product was technologically inferior to competitors, yet they disrupted the industry. Sticky notes, okay, could be. Microsoft, VHS, okay, great. Okay, what I was thinking of is the Nintendo Wii. When Nintendo launched the Nintendo Wii, they used off-the-shelf, non-proprietary technology. What they did right was serve an underserved market of casual gamers with motion control, with very simple games, because casual gamers don't care about graphics or computing power. So they figured out how to make a cheaper device for a larger market. So this became a profit-spitting machine based on inferior technology. So again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we shouldn't do technology innovation, but just realize innovation is much larger, okay, which may or may not use technology. So that is the last thing I want to say kind of as a foundation of what we're going to do. Now let's get to portfolios, managing a portfolio, and basically you manage two portfolios. So I'm going to show you a little video. Only, I've showed it the first time yesterday, so you're the second audience on the planet that's going to see this video about how to manage a portfolio with our newest tool, the Portfolio Map. So maybe thumbs up if you can hear the video. Let's see.
Everything starts with an idea. Even the largest companies were once startups searching for a business model. When startups find their model, they scale and transform it into a mature company. They shift from an entrepreneurial mindset to a managerial mindset. We call these two fundamentally different worlds explore and exploit. Companies must manage both at the same time, a portfolio of existing businesses and a portfolio of new opportunities. The exploit portfolio helps you manage what you have by looking at the return on the one hand and the death and disruption risk on the other. Here you scale emerging business models, renovate declining ones, or make successful ones more resilient. You bolster your exploit portfolio with the following portfolio actions. Bring in outside business models through acquisitions, mergers, partnerships, or investments. Improve existing business models, shifting them from outdated to superior models. Remove business models that don't fit your strategy through divestitures or by dismantling them altogether. Yet, managing what you have is not enough in times of disruption. Even the best business models expire like a yogurt in the fridge. Avoid obsolescence and proactively develop and explore a portfolio of bold initiatives. Your search for growth engines requires two main activities. Increase the expected return by designing better business models. Reduce the innovation risk through rigorous testing. Adapt ideas based on evidence from the field until a value proposition and business model emerge. You manage your Explore portfolio with the following portfolio actions. Ideate and test your own business model and value proposition ideas, or invest in outside ventures, or do both. Once you start testing ideas with experiments, the evidence will suggest the path. Persevere and gather stronger evidence. Pivot and adapt the idea a little or a lot. Retire it entirely because the evidence indicates it won't work. To scale a tested and de-risked idea, transfer it to your exploit portfolio or spin it out if it doesn't fit your strategy. When in exploration, know that you can't pick the winner. Early on, good and bad ideas are indistinguishable. The only way to truly identify the winners is by investing small amounts of money in a large number of projects.
Okay.
Retire ideas.
So we now know how to manage an exploration portfolio and manage an exploitation portfolio. I'll focus on the exploration portfolio because that's harder, and most companies are pretty good at managing the top right-hand one, right? So we're going to start thinking about this. You just heard at the end, when you want to succeed in innovation, you can't pick the winner up front. So the question is, how many $100,000 innovation projects would you need to invest in to produce a mega success? Think, if you were Nestle, biggest food company in the world, if you invested in innovation projects, $100,000 each, how many would you have to invest in to create a mega success? So we're going to do a little poll here. So you can use your phone to immediately go to the Menti poll, and I'm going to put it onto the screen in a minute. Do you think it's 10 projects you need to invest in to create a big success? And a big success for Nestle would be 500 million billion or more, right? Like Nespresso. So, and remember, if you say 1,000, that means you're investing 100 million, of which a lot of them are going to fail. So let's see if I can seamlessly switch to a Menti poll. It's gonna be a little challenge, but let me see if I can do it. Oops, no, that's the same one. Okay. And people are probably already voting, which is great, but somehow oh, here is the Chrome. Okay, great. So you're all already voting. Otherwise, you can see there the link on top. Let's make sure we get a couple of votes. So it's very distributed. Some of you say 100 projects, some of you say 50, 25, 10. Few of you say 1,000, some of you say 250. Let's get some more votes. Come on, vote, vote, vote. You can do it on your phone or on the browser. Don't type into the Zoom chat window. Type into participate in the vote. Let's get a couple more. Go to the menti.com link and use the code. Very easy. We do a couple more after. So we only got 50 votes, right? Very poor. I thought India's good at voting. Got to prove that we're better at voting than the Americans. I shouldn't make political jokes. That's always very dangerous. Okay. Okay, good. Now we got a couple of people going. So that's good for the next one. Okay, so most of you, it's all over the place, really interesting. So we're not really sure. Yeah, there's not a unanimous kind of, not a unanimous opinion here. So let me go back to the slides. That's working. No, that didn't work. Maybe this. Okay, good. So I'm gonna give you the solution here, which is 250 projects that you would need to invest in. And at the beginning, you don't know which projects will actually succeed. It turns out 162 will completely fail. You will lose your investment. 162 will fail. 87 will know some success, so some return on capital. And only 1 out of 250 or 4 out of 1,000 will be mega successes. So how do I know that? How do I know that? Because in early stage venture capital, the closest proxy, and this is US early stage venture capital, we can see that 162 will fail, 6 out of 10 investments. 3 out of 10, 87, will know some success. They will return capital here. But to create a big success, which we'd need in a big company like Nestle, actually only 4 out of 1,000 will succeed. And it's the same logic for you if you're a startup. So if we have a couple of startups here, it's very clear that many of you won't succeed, and very few of you will create a very big business. And that's okay as long as you know the logic. So how do we actually do this now and bring this back to real companies? So let me give you a real case. And I deliberately took a company that is kind of in technology, but it's not a high-tech company per se, as we know it, Amazon or so, Bosch, okay? Engineering company, does a lot of technology, but it's not the typical kind of technology player. So they have around 400,000 employees, big company. And Uwe Kirchner here, this gentleman, he created the Bosch Accelerator program. And they used exactly this logic that you can't pick the winner. So here's what they did to keep it efficient, because you can't invest in 250 projects like $1 million or $10 million. So they would give 200 teams a starting capital of 120,000 euro, which I think is already pretty high. And they gave them 3 months, okay? 120,000 euros, the equivalent of $120,000 maybe. And they give them 3 months. But here's what they do after 3 months. They say the teams need to get out of the building and test their ideas, this early customer discovery. They need to do experiments like interviews with customers to figure out, do the customers have those jobs, pains, and gains? Do they have a budget, right? After 6 months, they would kill 70% of the projects, okay? So we could say 70% are failures, or we could say more gently, they're retired. Only 30% get here, 60 teams get a follow-up investment, a little bit more because we reduced the risk, $300,000, and they would go on. They might get 6 to 12 months. And again, the same process. 75% of the teams are retired. They don't get follow-up investment. Only a fraction here got investment. So only 15 out of 200. So we had 200 down here, and 15 are transferred up there. So we have this funnel. And it relies on the logic that you can't pick the winner. But it means small investments at the beginning before you make the bigger investments. It's the exact opposite of what many leaders do Oh, we need a big return, we make a big bet. That works up here, right? Building a new factory, new supply chain, new sales force. That works when it's predictable. Down here, it doesn't. You start with small bets and you scale up. This is incredibly important, and we're now starting to see companies do this. This is what companies like Amazon have been doing for a long time. Now, some of you might say, well, but these are corporate giants. How can I do this at a smaller scale? It's exactly the same logic because, of course, here you're not looking for $1 billion. You might be looking for 1 million, 10 million, or whatever other kind of size you think of. So let me give you a small family-owned business in Switzerland, which is very international. Laurastarr, they make irons to sell across the world, high-end steam irons to iron your clothes. Okay, this is what they've been doing for a couple of decades. A guy called Jean Monnet, an entrepreneur, created this company, kept it alive. He now transferred it last year to his children, Mike Monnet and Julie Monnet, and they split their roles between Julie, who's a bit more operational, and Mike, so Julie more operational, and Mike more focused on innovation. And they started to invest in this kind of portfolio approach. So they started out with the irons. They had a traditional R&D department. They did come up with a technology. Here's a steamer technology. This is called the Iggy, which allows you to disinfect clothes. And then they realized it's maybe not just about the clothes, it's about health in general. So it's a machine or a device that can disinfect. So they started to ask themselves, what are the different business models we could think of? If we sell into the health industry to hospitals, it's a different business model with different channels and different regulations than if we sell, to a broader mass market. Different implication if we sell through retailers or if we sell direct. So they started to do that, couple of projects before they decide which one to scale. They experiment. They don't just make PowerPoints and spreadsheets. So the same logic applies at a small company level, small and medium-sized company level. It's just that the outcome will be a little bit less impressive financially, but at the scale of their scale, it's still very powerful. So the idea here is that you want to avoid the big failures of making big bets, but you embrace small failures that allow you to constantly adapt the idea. And it's a big thing that I want to emphasize. Ideas don't matter because ideas are free, they're everywhere. I've never seen a company without great ideas, without great people. But what I have seen is companies without the structures and processes that allow smart entrepreneurial teams to adapt the ideas until we have a great value proposition and a great business model, okay? So the starting point is less relevant than the ending point. So big lesson to take away here after our first kind of half an hour is you can't pick the winner in innovation, so you need to work with a portfolio. In the startup world, it's very established with venture capital. In the established company world, small and big, we need to do that more. Brings me to the next topic, designing and testing business models. So the process has two iterations, if you want. One is business design. You look at your business model and value proposition. And the other one is testing it. So rather than making a business plan, the business plan is the enemy of innovation. You want to constantly test and adapt your ideas. So ideas are just the starting point. How does this process look like? You ideate around what could be the value proposition or business model. You make a conceptual prototype with the business model canvas and the value proposition canvas. But immediately, you spend maybe half a day or a day on that, maximum. Immediately you ask, what are the hypotheses underlying this idea that we need to test with experiments in order to learn and adapt the idea? Incredibly important that we go through this double loop. And when you go through this double loop, you will de-risk the ideas. So what does that mean for us? It means when we start with an idea, our main point is not to build something. Innovation and entrepreneurship is not about building something. It's about decreasing the risk of innovation, of your idea to adapt it, so you don't build something nobody wants. And you do that with small and cheap experiments first, and you increase the experiments, like we've seen with Bosch, right? So the first teams, they maybe just did interviews and techniques related to interviews. the customers say we're not interested, but they reduce the risk so they don't build something nobody wants. They maybe make a PDF document to share the idea. In business to business, you can make a spec sheet of your service. Okay, customers don't like it. You reduce the risk more. And you only make the technology investments once you've reduced the risk enough. So the technological, building something, MVPs, minimal viable products that people like to use a lot, that only comes after a certain while. So innovation testing is not about building something. That's why we wrote a book, the one before the Invincible Company, called Testing Business Ideas. You need to test your ideas and adapt them before you build anything. Okay, so we call these experiments. So in the book, we come up with 44 business experiments to work almost like a scientist, obviously not as rigorous, to test and adapt your business ideas, your product, services, value propositions, and business models. Incredibly important. Okay, so I'd like you to maybe quickly think of what are the business experiments that you perform in your company? And I'm not talking research and development, right? That's technology stuff, which is important, but we're talking here about reducing the risk that your value proposition or business model are not going to work. So think of the business experiments you do. Because if you don't, you might end up like Quibi. Who of you has heard ever of Quibi? American company that said, we are going to optimize the video experience for the mobile phone. So they said, we're going to be the Netflix competitor, and we're going to build the equivalent of Netflix for mobile phones. Smaller chunk videos, but the similar principle. And they had a very, very experienced executive team. They had Meg Whitman, who used to manage HP, big corporate giant. She was CEO of HP. She was the CEO of Quibi. They had Jeffrey Katzenberg, a very well-known Hollywood figure. So they had great talent at the head of the company. The problem is, these were execution talent, great managers, smart people, but running a business. They were good because of their network and their charisma to raise money. They raised $1.75 billion. But what happens when you raise so much money and you have a great execution team? You're going to build something potentially that nobody wants. You're going to execute a business plan because the numbers always look good in the spreadsheet. The problem is these numbers are fantasies. So in execution, building a new factory, we can predict. In innovation, we can't. So this business didn't go bankrupt yet, but it's very likely to either get sold for a very low price or go south. Now, obviously, they can blame COVID-19 for this because people are not commuting, but I think it's a bit of a cheap excuse. So you need to start with small investments. So Vinod Khosla, who we saw at the beginning, he likes to say, if you give a team too much money, you decrease the chances of success. And when you hear people, they often say, oh, I just need a good idea and I need money and then I'm going to succeed. Actually, you give a team too much money, you're going to decrease the chances of success. Why? Because people will build something nobody wants. So, could be like Harley Davidson in India, I'm seeing in the chat. I don't know exactly what they did in India. So, here we said we need to create something to help teams reduce risk and uncertainty, to help leaders invest in evidence, not ideas they like. So what we're going to do is another poll. So now you know how to do it. So please don't type into the chat window. Go to the poll. I would like you to write which innovation metrics you track today. So everybody please participate so we get a nice big picture of everybody. What are the innovation metrics? And this goes for startups and for established companies. Which innovation metrics do you track today? And sorry, yeah, I just need to put on the next slide here, and then we can get started with our word cloud. So write down on Menti, which innovation metrics do you track at your organization today? Let's see if we can get the word cloud going. Is this a bit of an, yeah? You track how many ideas, how many prototypes you made, RPA, not sure what that is. Cohorts, you track the cohorts. Okay, let's get going, let's get going. Because if you're not putting anything, I'm going to assume Indian companies don't track anything in innovation, which I think is not the case. Pretty sure we can invalidate that option. Okay, ideas is a big one. We're tracking the number of ideas. We're tracking the number of ideas generated. We're tracking the number of patents. Tracking failures, I can see. This is getting interesting, right? So type, type, type. We're going to give it another maybe 30 seconds or so. This is a good one to give us an idea. Tracking the number of prototypes. Tracking the number of business model canvases I see. Value propositions, products. Okay. Now, while we're looking at this, let me tell you what's worrying me. Tracking the number of ideas and ideas generated is a vanity metric because ideas don't matter. What matters is at the end, the result. Now, what can we track between idea and result is how much we're reducing the risk, how much closer are we getting from idea to real business. That's what we need to track. How much closer are we getting from idea to real business? So while I'm saying that, let me try to switch to my slides. Somehow, yeah, this is not as easy the switching as I thought, but that's okay. Good. So remember I showed you here, we should never track the number of ideas because ideas are just fantasies. What we need to track is this one. How much have we reduced the risk of the idea? How much closer have we moved to a real business? Okay, that's what we want to track. That sounds pretty abstract. We can actually do that. So if we take here, let's already look at this. The risk of these three ideas, they're actually not the same. So already here, we can say if we look at this risk curve, well, guess what? This here is a lot less risky because we're just, in quotes, improving the warehouse. No new customers, okay? No new value proposition. So a lot of the things are not unknown. Here, more unknowns, when we do Amazon Web Services, everything's unknown. So we like to call this desirability, feasibility, viability, and adaptability risk. This is related to customers. This is related to can we build it? This is related to can we make money from it? And this is related to environmental risk. So what you need to measure in innovation and entrepreneurship is, are you getting closer from a fantasy idea in a spreadsheet and in a PowerPoint towards a real business? Are we getting closer? And the challenge here is pre-revenue. So what we did is we came up with something that's called the Innovation Project Scorecard. You can Google that. You'll see a blog post. You can download it for free. And in this scorecard, you can score any team as a team or as leaders. And here's what you score. You score the evidence that the team brought to the table to show customers are interested. They have the problem. They like our solution. Feasibility, we can actually manage the patents. We can scale the supply chain. Viability, we can make more money from it because we tested the price. We have very concrete pricing evidence. Adaptability, that the timing is right, the macroeconomic environment. So these are the things you have to test and bring evidence to the table before you make decisions here. So the more evidence you have, the more you're moving to risk reduction, okay? So what are we still missing here? If we're doing this on a corporate level, we're still missing not just the risk. We need to know how big is this idea, okay? It's the expected return. Is this a $10 million opportunity or is it a $1 billion opportunity? We need to measure how much have we spent on testing this idea. Oh, we spent, remember, Bosch, we spent 120,000 euro. How much time did we spend? Remember Bosch? 3 months. And then an additional 6 months. And what you should do is, if you have a project you've been working on for 12 months and you've spent maybe, let's say, $300,000 and you have zero evidence that this could work, and I'm not talking PowerPoint deck or spreadsheet, I'm talking evidence, then you should kill this idea. Rest in peace. And that's the biggest problem in every corporation I meet around the world, is the ability to kill ideas that don't bring evidence to the table. The ability, I remember talking to Bracken Darrell, the CEO of Logitech. He said, Alex, don't use kill. Why don't we use retire or shelf the idea like we shelf a good book? Because we could use them again later on. It's just that right now they don't work. But the ability to retire or shelf ideas is incredibly critical. So once we follow these metrics, we can make evidence-based investments. It's not just what the leader likes, because the leader's opinion is actually not that important in innovation. It's the evidence from the intrapreneurial team. It's exactly the same logic for startups and for corporations. So summarizing, this gives us 4 metrics we need to follow for every project, and that will allow us to make decisions. This is exactly how we do it in the startup world, and this is exactly how we need to do it in the corporate world. Now, one small caveat, you don't need to scale every company. If you're established, you can also acquire. But if you do test inside first, you will make better acquisitions, right? So you need to use the entire kind of portfolio of actions. So we looked at the testing axis. Now, we looked at how to test an idea, and I just gave you scratched at the surface. This is an entire masterclass. We do masterclasses this on 3 days. So I'm going to show you now how to improve the business design. So got about another 10 minutes or so. I'm going to show you how to improve the business design. So you're going to use this business model canvas that many of you know. So just warm it up very quickly. The business model canvas is 9 building blocks of how to bring your value proposition to the market, what activities and resources you need to do that, which will lead you to understand the cost structure. And if we know that, then we need to ask, how are we going to get to the market, the go-to market, through which channels, retailers, direct, indirect, our own stores, the relationship you're going to establish, and how we're going to capture value, the revenue sources. Great. So we know the basics, but now let me get more sophisticated. We're going to move into what we call business design. So my friend Roger Martin used to be the #1 business thinker of the world. He says we need to be more like designers in business when we create new opportunities. So we came up with a design technique to use better business models so you can package your technology innovations, your product innovations into better business models. And we call this business model patterns. The same pattern that you could apply in different industries that will improve your return on product or technology. So there are 2 types of patterns. One is when we invent our idea, more like a greenfield, okay? And the other one, more about improving a business model that we already have. We call that shift patterns. So let's go into the first one, the invent patterns. And I'm going to give you a little exercise since I've been talking a lot. We just did a little poll. We're going to go into one of these areas and we're going to look at one of these patterns. So we came up with 9 patterns. 1 more around customers, 1 more around what I'll call the backstage, around activities and resources. How do you configure those? And 1 set of patterns, 3 patterns around profit formula disruption. And we're just going to look at 1 because we don't have that much time. Front stage disruption. So type into the chat window very quickly what these 3 companies added to their business model and that keeps them ahead of competition. What do you think? The Xbox, console, Windows operating system, and the iPod back in the day. What do you think? They're all platforms, subscription models, design, okay? I'll say they all added switching costs. They increased gravity. So we call these gravity creators. They lock in customers. All of them locked in customers in a different way. Okay, so Vinit came up with lock-in, right? So this is what we call a pattern. What's the pattern? I come up with a value proposition for the customer segment that locks in the customer and thus increases the lifetime value, the money we can make from the customer. So, little exercise. I'm going to make it simple. We're going to use the iPod, historic example. When Steve Jobs launched the iPod, he famously said, it's the first time we can put 1,000 songs in a pocket. What he really wanted us to do is lock us in and put all our music into the iPod, legally or illegally purchased. So we couldn't get out of the iPod system anymore. So what we're going to do, and it's only 2 minutes, I'm going to give you the building blocks of the iPod pattern. So not the full business model, just the pattern here, the gravity creators. And I want you to write down the full sequence. And when you have the full sequence, you can type it into the chat window. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do this. So let's see who's the fastest business model thinker in this webinar. And I'm going to give you the first, the iPod 1,000 songs in a pocket. So being able to put 1,000 songs onto that device, which was difficult at the time. Remember, it was difficult at the time. I want you to come up with the rest of the business model. So you just match the letters with the numbers, and when you have the full sequence, Habib, no, only the full sequence. Don't put one letter after a time, because we're over 400 live participants here. In the chat, put the full sequence when you have it. So we're going to play business model patterns now, because that allows us to improve our product technology innovations. Okay, so we got the first full ones from Selvam, only the full ones, yeah, a couple of full ones coming in. Good. I took an easy one, not too hard, I think. Okay, I see participation still active. Good, people are finishing up. Good. And anybody who is not participating, you're basically saying you don't care about your business model. You don't care about the success of your organization. You need to be a little bit provocative to get everybody to work, right? In a webinar, we like to just consume. We want to make this a workshop more than a talk shop. Okay, good. We have still good participation. Let's get a couple more. Maybe some of you were new to the business model canvas. Okay, let me show you. So 1,000 songs in a pocket was the value proposition. This music listening device and the target customer segment. So the solution was ADB-EFC. Target segment was obviously clear. That's the mass market. Switching costs, because once you put all of the music on the device back then, it was hard to go to a different platform. Obviously today with Spotify, you don't have that lock-in anymore, but back then it was really a switching cost. Because of that switching cost, Apple could sell iPods again and again and again. And I believe actually that was the foundation for their iPhone empire today, because that's how they started locking in customers. In the backstage, so we have the channels here. In the backstage, there was a technology innovation. It was hard back then to create the technology and software to put 1,000 songs on a device. Believe it or not, back then it was hard. So here you have a pattern which we call the gravity creator, which any business should think of. So we came up with 9 of these patterns because people don't think of this enough. And while it seems very trivial, I see startups and corporate innovators not thinking business model. So we have different flavors of this particular pattern, and we have a trigger question that you should ask yourself when you're building a new business or when you assess your organization. So you can assess what you have as an organization or what you are creating. So I'll actually keep it with this pattern so we can look at a little bit the idea of innovation culture. But there are patterns in the book that are also about shifting from one business model to another one. For example, shifting from selling stuff towards a platform, shifting from products to services, from low tech to high tech. You can find that in the book. So talking culture in the last 5 minutes we have, you need to keep and maintain and excel at your exploitation culture, managing what you have. But you need to create a parallel culture, an exploration culture. And there was a recent study by Innovation Leader where they looked at what is preventing innovation from happening in most companies. And there were two things. One is politics. The other one is cultural issues, that the innovation culture is missing. So we came up with a very simple tool called the culture map that allows you to map and design a culture. So we did this work together with a guy called Dave Gray. We came up with a very simple tool. What behaviors do we want to see in a company? What kind of innovation behaviors? Okay, for example, that people test before they execute. Once we see those behaviors, we'll see a certain outcome. Innovation will thrive or innovation will be stifled. And the only thing we can work on is this bottom layer of what enables and blocks us from creating innovation. So if you look at specifically an exploration culture, you need to work on 3 areas: leadership, organizational design, and the innovation practices, the tools, like business model canvas, value proposition canvas, innovation metrics, like we've seen with the scorecard. So I'm going to go first into here, the first part, leadership support, and we're going to keep it very simple, and I'm not going to do the poll, but think of it. How much time do you as a CEO or does your CEO spend on innovation every week? And I like to ask this question on social media. And I always get the same answer, that actually very few leaders, very few CEOs spend time on innovation. Most of them, look at this, less than half a day, from 0 to 10%. Only 17% spend more than a day on innovation. And I like to say, if that is the case, if the leader doesn't spend time on innovation, guess what? That's a very strong symbolic signal that innovation doesn't matter to this company. So when you look at companies that re-injected the innovation spirit, you see that the CEO spends a ton of time on innovation. So if we take Logitech, Bracken Darrell turned around the company by re-infusing energy by doing 2 things: spending time on innovation and reallocating resources from their traditional business, computer mice, to emerging businesses. So he likes to call this trees, plants, and seeds. 75% of the resources were reallocated from the trees, the biggest business that still makes most money, towards the seeds, which will make most money in 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And if you don't do that early enough, you'll end up like Kodak, because they did not invest early enough. Now, the last one I'll show you here, and we'll wrap up with that, is, well, sometimes it might not be the CEO, so we have to work on the organizational design. So if the CEO is not spending time on innovation, over here we have the CEO, we like to say, together with my co-author Yves, you need to have a chief entrepreneur who has the same equivalent amount of power, and they collaborate. And once an idea is big enough, it goes over to this portfolio. And the CEO talks about the needs that he or she might need for their business. And a good example of this is Ping An. So rather than having the CEO spend time on innovation, the founder, Peter Ma, said, we're going to get disrupted. I am going to hire Jessica Tan to run the exploration business. She got 10% of profits and 1% of revenues to create an exploration culture, a culture where they could experiment, fail, and succeed by adapting. So failure for them was not a problem. In that sense, when they built this, they started to grow substantially. So in less than a decade, they went from the top 400 companies in the world to the top 30 companies in the world, not just in terms of valuation, but in terms of revenues and profit. So that is amazing, and it shows that it can be done, this transformation, in less than a decade. So I'm going to stop here just with one last thing. Prediction obviously is difficult when it comes to innovation, when it comes to the future. So there are different techniques. Well, I've showed you some that I think are a little bit more sophisticated than this, and it's actually relatively easy to identify if the techniques work or not. So I'll end with a little bit of French humor since we Swiss are not very funny. Short video.
Alors, Jean-Fabien, vous êtes voyant, n'est-ce pas?
Exactement, je prévois l'avenir.
Et celle-là? Hein? Tu l'as prévue, celle-là? Vous voyez, Jules Edouard, pas besoin de long débat pour démystifier les charlatans.
Okay, so that's the way how you demystify. People are telling you innovation is easy. It's not, but we now know how to do it. That's the good news. Leadership commitment, I think it's now possible to actually get there because we figured out how the tools work to get there. So that was it for me. I hope you learned something. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. I think that was an innovation in how to make a Zoom presentation. I think one of the most interactive Zoom presentations that I have seen. So really, thank you so much for that. What we'll do now is move to the fireside chat. Am I audible to everybody?
Yes, Venki.
Okay. So we'll move quickly to the fireside chat, and we have two dynamic entrepreneurs. But before that, I have to thank one individual and one organization. I want to thank Mahindra University, the Mahindra Leadership University team for also being a part of this webinar because Udita and team have been very active in terms of, I'm told that this is actually being live streamed inside the Mahindra group. So thanks to the Mahindra group. And Jai Jayaraman, the former CEO of Colgate in India, he has been the instrumental factor who brought all of us together for this particular leadership webinar and requested Alex to do this webinar. Having said that, thanks so much, Alex. This is really exciting because in my previous avatar at iSpirit, we were helping banks transition to an era of non-linear change. And in our taxonomy, there are three kinds of change. One is a predictable change or a process innovation driven change. So cutting down the time to open a bank account from 7 days to 5 days would be a process change. The other is disruptive change, where you know what the end state looks like. So for example, the software industry had to move to the global delivery model, base it out of India because of the cost and the talent availability. And it was hugely disruptive for companies like IBM and others. But we knew what the end state looks like. And the third change we call as non-linear change, where you don't know what the end state looks like. So in that kind of a situation, we spent a lot of time working with the largest banks in India, helping them understand how to use new technologies like the unified payment interface, the Aadhaar KYC, etc. And it was a very, very challenging time because many of these banks did not really understand how to deal with non-linear change and how to deal with a situation where the future is highly unpredictable. And what you have essentially done is a really fantastic roadmap for how organizations can deal with non-linear change. Having said that, to balance out this fantastic theoretical framework that you have given us, we invited two very dynamic entrepreneurs to join us for a fireside chat. Rajan Anandan, I had the privilege of working with Rajan while he was the managing director of Google. And I remember when Rajan joined in, we all thought that Google is doing really well. But he came in and he astonished all of us by just turbocharging the sales engine. So he is in a sense a paragon of the exploit model. But apart from that, he's also been a prolific venture capital. So apart from being the CEO of a large innovating organization like Google in India and Asia Pacific, he also has a vast amount of investments in some of the most innovative startups in India. And Google is also, I think, a paragon of this whole model of explore and exploit. I think the model of online ads, etc., Google really pioneered it, took it to the next level. And the Alphabet side of the company, when the term Alphabet was coined and the new venture was called Alphabet, we all used to wonder, what is this? I mean, why call it Alphabet? And then later on, we realized it was Alpha and bet, two words combined together, which, I mean, then a certain kind of a light bulb went off in our heads. And to this day, I hold on to my Google shares because I know that if one particular business engine tapers off, if the current business engine tapers off, it still has a number of business models that it can explore, which will be hopefully able to replace the existing business model, which is incredibly powerful. So we also have another dynamic entrepreneur, Mr. Sanjay Bell, who after almost 3 decades of working with large organizations, 30,000 plus organizations like Levers, Raymond's, and the Reliance Ambani Group, Anil Ambani Group, has now gone on to start his own Internet of Things business, which is called Nextcore. Sanjay Bell is also the chairman of the CII National Committee on HR and Leadership. So Rajan and Sanjay, welcome to the Fireside Chat. And I'd like to start by asking you, Rajan, what are the learnings that you have in terms of having been part of Google and having worn two hats? One, that of a CEO of a large enterprise in India, and the second hat is that of somebody who's managed a portfolio of I think almost 70 angel investments. Over to you, Rajan.
Yeah, thanks, Venki, and great to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and also Alex. It was great to hear you over the past hour or so. Look, I think I had the good fortune of being at Google. Venki, you and I were there together for a long time. I was there for a long time, and before that at Microsoft, and then before that at Dell, where I worked for Michael Dell. So it was good to see Michael's picture. And prior to that, I was at McKinsey for over a decade, where I actually worked with lots of companies on trying to get them to be more innovative. So it's a topic that is quite dear and near to me. And now I'm actually at Sequoia Capital, where I focus on seed stage investing. So I think I've seen sort of the smallest of small companies and the biggest of big companies. Look, I fundamentally think it's really about leadership. I think it was probably one of the last few slides that Alex presented. Either you're going to have a CEO that really wants to change and wants to be a very different kind of company that not only just focuses on growth for the now and for the next year or two, and then also innovate for the future, or you're not, right? And I think what Ping An did, the example that Alex shared, is very hard to do, right? Because I think what a lot of companies do is they have a chief innovation officer. I think that's a dead-end job, complete dead-end job, right? Because the only people who want to be a chief innovation officer in a company are the people who can't run the businesses, right? So if you look at what Ping An did, I mean, you brought in somebody who's very senior. You gave them massive amounts of independence. You gave them lots and lots of capital. You gave them 1% of revenue and 15% of profit. Okay, she's a billionaire now, right? Not somebody you bring in and say, here's 2 crores, and now you go off into a different building and please hire 50 people. And the minute you want to hire the 50th person, you come and get approvals from me, right? So I think, my first thing is, and by the way, if you can do that, and I think there are maybe a few companies in India that could do that, where again, you have to have a very, very progressive leadership of a company, right? To say if you're going to make that kind of bet, and with that kind of empowerment, with those kinds of economics. Because remember, somebody who's going to go build $1 billion business isn't going to come work for you for 3 crores. It's just not going to happen, right? And so I think first and foremost thing is about leadership, right? I think, if you look at it, and it's very interesting having, worked at Google, Microsoft, Dell, etc. It amazes me that at this point, several of the, we have $4 trillion companies now, right? Globally, almost all of them were led by founders for a very long period of time, right? None of them actually had professional managers early in their tenure. So although, Eric was the CEO of Google, Larry and Sergey were very much there. And then Larry and Sergey came back, and I think when the market cap was, I think it was 2011, must have been about 200-300 billion. So I think leadership is a single most important thing. And I think if you've been leading for 30 years a certain way, can a CEO change? Possibly. Look, my 11 years at McKinsey and now, having lots of friends who run lots of companies in India and other parts of Asia, I think it's really hard, right? And if you really want to do it, I think it's a massive personal transformation. And if that's something that can be done, that can be done, right? So I do think that this is a very important topic. It's absolutely critical because otherwise you end up in sort of irrelevance. But it's about leadership, right? And I like to think of so that's number one. I think secondly, it's about a culture. It's at the end of the day, innovation is all about culture, right? Because I looked at all of these frameworks from Alex, and it took me back to my McKinsey days, right? All the companies that use all of these frameworks are actually not innovative. They don't have a culture of innovation, right? A culture of innovation is when a 23-year-old in your company comes to you and says, hey, I've got this great idea. I want to go do this.
Yeah.
The CEO or the president or the head of, XYZ business says, not like, okay, first you ask a few questions just to make sure you know enough about the market to say, yeah, this is interesting. You give them, some capital or whatever they need to go do it, right? I mean, that's what an innovative culture is, right? And and I saw this at Google, right? And you have these companies that have these complex frameworks and like, oh my God, it's like every time you want to get an idea approved, it's like a whole damn budgeting process, right?
Yes.
That's not how these great companies work, right? So I think second thing is about a culture. And I think the third one really is even at places like Google, at Microsoft, look at Facebook, right? It's very targeted innovation, right? It's not like, see, the thing is these corporate incubators, I think, they get set up for different reasons, right? Now, I like the Target Accelerator in India because they're trying to bring in the best technologies that can help Target. I got that part, right? But there are sort of like every company now has sort of an incubator accelerator, right? Most of them, Venki, I think are nonsense.
Yeah.
Because like, who's going to go into this incubator? I mean, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to go up and start up. You come to us at Sequoia Capital and we'll fund you. And you're going to be, if you're successful, you're going to be a billionaire, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
you don't need to be
go
tied to the
into
corporate
this incubator, this accelerator, and you get $100,000 and then you get processed to death because you got all these damn stage gates and, like blah, 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 etc. right? Well, where's it going to take you? So I think targeted innovation is very, very important, right? I think companies that are very innovative, right? So for instance, let's say at Google, when I was there, we said we wanted to get into payments. We were very clear. We said we wanted to get into 2 or 3 areas. Some worked, payments, Google Pay has been a huge hit, right? Some didn't work as well, but it wasn't like we were trying to do 100 things, right? So Google, when I left, several $1 billion of revenue, largest user base by far in the world. We had a massive business, we had a lot of profit, but we weren't trying to do 100 things, right? We were saying, look, these are 3-4 areas where we're going to try to go out and build very big products and over time businesses. And we're going to bet in those spaces, right? So I think that's the third. And then the last one is really the people, right? I think what happens to most big companies, and this I used to see at McKinsey in spades. Now, keep in mind, I was at McKinsey a long time ago, or, like 17 years ago, right? But what I'd seen every big company is all the new initiatives and new businesses were run by the people that the CEO didn't know what to do with. That's not the way to do it, right? You want to take your absolute best talent and put them on these initiatives because they're the ones who can make it work. So I think so at Google, what we do is, because there's a culture of innovation, because you get recognized that, the way you actually succeed. And as you know, Venki, the way you move up at Google is to do big new things, right? It's not to sort of keep the machine running. Yes, keep the machine running is very, very important. At this point, you have a $180 billion business that grows 20% year on year globally. You got to keep the machine running, right? But you also know, the culture is such that doing big new things is sort of how you make a mark for yourself at Google. So as a result, the best people want to go out and do these big new projects. So targeted innovation, and then finally, the absolute best people, right, going into it, right? So as you recall, we did a project called Internet Sati. Why did we do Internet Sati? Because we felt that unless you could get women online at scale, right? 700 million Indians are women, 1.4 billion people in the country, right? At the time, there were less than 50 million women on the internet. We said, why is that? My God, our discrepancy was higher than we had seen it anywhere else in the world. So we said, let's go address that, right? And then Neha, who was, and by the way, it was Neha's idea. Neha at Google, right? She came to us and said, at the time, Sandeep was the CMO, and said, hey, look, we should do this thing. I want to launch this major initiative. We're going to go get women online. We were like, okay, yeah, that makes sense because that's an area that we wanted. So I think this targeted innovation. She was terrific talent. We took out of her role, we put her into this, we gave her the resources that she needed to actually go and make it happen, right? So I'd say those are sort of some of the things that I've seen Venki at Google, at some of these other companies, and now also by the way, I think using a venture capital model in a large company where you have to make 200-300 bets. Actually, because look, keep in mind, even at at Sequoia Capital in India, right? We've been here 15 years. We have $5.5 billion assets under management. We only have 200 plus companies. It's hard for us to manage, right? So you can imagine now you take a legacy company. When I say legacy, I mean a large established company in a traditional industry. And now you say, go make 200 bets. Are you kidding me? Right? So I think you've got to be targeted. You've got to be very, very targeted about, go after these kinds of spaces, because either they're adjacencies or they're spaces where we're going to see a lot of disruption. And then you've got to put your absolute best people. You got to put your absolute best people. And, it's the way Amazon does it, right? Amazon doesn't say, look, we're going to get into the music streaming space and maybe it won't work. Once they decide they're going to be in music streaming, I mean, trust me, we'll be here in 2040 and Amazon is either going to be number one in music streaming or they're going to be still trying. Yeah. Right? So I think it's very, I guess the way to put it is, it's very purposeful. It's purposeful innovation. And I think that's very, very important, because too many companies try to sort of, put lots of darts on the board and try to do lots of different things. And not surprisingly, most of them fail, right? So anyway, long answer to your question, but that's what I've seen.
So I'll pick up from your thread and, come back to Alex, because what Alex seemed to be saying is that you need to try out multiple things and then see what works. What you're saying is that you need to make a few targeted bets. So I'll come to Alex on that. But before that, I want to segue to Sanjay, because Sanjay, you work with some of the largest companies in India, some of the largest brands, the Anil Dhirubhai Ambani group, and you work with Raymonds, you work with Levers. These are 30,000 plus large enterprises. What are the challenges and how do you kind of get these kind of large enterprises to change? Because I assume that these are fairly linear, hierarchical entities and organizations which have, decades of expertise in building their enterprises. Unlike, say, a Google, where a Rajan can say, hey, Neha, this is, the pot of money. This is the kind of support that we give you. Go run with this and build this into a big program. I assume that is much harder in an entity like, say, a Raymonds or a Lever, etc., etc. Over to you, Sanjay.
No, thanks, Venki, and thanks, Rajan. Good to see you. Thanks, Alex. It was a privilege to listen to you. Coming, Venki, to specific point that you said, I kind of agree with you that there are a lot of Nehas like Google in other organizations too, but I think the structures and the systems and the culture point that I think Rajan so aptly really put comes as a barrier rather than an enabler or facilitator really to put that. But I think this is also one of the most pertinent questions which actually confounds most business leaders of very large and established organizations. And I've just been a part of one of the organizations, but I do speak on behalf of a lot of my colleagues, and this is kind of the discussion point for a very long time. It surely has led me to introspect this fairly deeply over the years. This whole balance, as Alex put it, between exploit and explore, or what I call it, the new and the renew and the new, because you get consumed with renew part in large and established organization, and the new really gets traded off in that bargain. So my submission really is that most of our large and established businesses are today built for efficiency and predictability. And I think this is the point that Alex did mention, that they're not built for disruption. And at best, you reach a chief innovation officer or an incubator, as Rajan said. But I'm not sure with these things that are there, we have enough wherewithal in large and established organizations, not just to thrive, but even survive in the new world that is emerging from the intersection of many technologies that are today there. And I think they are defining absolutely new paradigms of benefits to the consumer. So in my view, I think we need to change the heuristics itself on which we run our today's organization if we have to really be relevant. And we need to do it really fast. And there's a good reason I say we need to really do it fast, because I think Rajan again alluded to it, and I'm just going to say my firm belief is that in the next decade, there is going to be more economic wealth created on this planet than it has been till today. Yeah, you already seen $1 trillion country GDPs used to be a far-fetched dreams about a decade, 2 decades back for us. Today, we're talking about $4 trillion organizations, and I'm not going to be surprised that there are 100 by 2025 and probably 1,000 by the end of this decade. So, and that's going to be more than the global GDP that we have today. Now, let me really spend about 2 minutes trying to explain the leader dilemma, the specific question, Venki, you asked. In linear, large established organization, you mentioned Levers, Reliance, been part of Nokia for some time, but also the Raymond the last 6-7 years that I have been leading it. Look, most of these organizations are built for what you call a linear growth, yeah, and rightly so. Whereas the growth today is exponential. Competition is non-sectoral. So a fashion retail industry is unlikely to fail, a legacy organization 1900 years, by another competition by a newborn fashion retail company. And that's not going to happen. That's not going to challenge Raymond. But Raymond has to really worry about a traditional non-sectoral kind of a benefit coming from digital fashion, for example. Now, what is that paradigm? What is the equivalent of that? That's going to be so non-sectoral kind of competition. And new concepts for satisfying consumer needs are growing at a compounded rate by multiple technologies which are intersecting today. They're rapidly accelerating. The price performance ratio of everything that you and I consume today is more than doubling every 12 to 18 months. And that's going to be, that's not what we have been trained for. You know, we've been trained for linear kind of growth. So whether it's automotive, energy, healthcare is what I think Alex mentioned, banking, retail sector, I think all of them are going to be a different kind of a sectors today. So that's the first thing, which is we built organizations and enterprise for linear. The growth today is exponential. So that's the first. Second, we built organizations like all these traditional large companies with vertical structures and matrix organizations. The world today is horizontal and shared platform. Now that's a very different concept. The world wants a different vocabulary. Time zones sensitivity more with COVID, as you know, has already changed. The cultures, the processes, knowledge, collaborative working, gig, work from anywhere, crowdsourcing, open sourcing. I'm just picking up 8-10 random concepts of today. They are going to be 80% accretive to the economic wealth creation, all these concepts. And look at the organizations, even if they have a 5% accommodation for any of these kinds of concepts. So our structures are hard-coded. Organization structures are enabler for growth, but our structures are very hard-coded. We as leaders have been trained, conditioned, then skilled and conditioned consistently year after year, rewarded to manage scarcity. So we were given that this is your asset, this is the capital, this is the people. Return on capital is going to decide the incentive for a CEO or the management team there, return on equity, return on. So everything was return on a finite denominator. Yeah, that is how we've been rewarded. Now the world is moved to abundance. It's not no more about scarcity. Where is the problem about designers today? I could go in 24 hours and create open sourcing design brief today and get it at a fraction of the cost of any fashion retail company coming to me and pay only if that design becomes commercially a successful design. And I could use the global resource to do that. Now that's a very different paradigm. Now, how does a linear established organization, Venki, that you mentioned, really accommodate for this completely new paradigm there? We've rewarded predictability. And the actual opportunity today is unpredictability. And Rajan is absolutely right. And I think Alex mentioned this again and again. If you have failure as a non-option, and if you don't convert into recipe to learn, you're going to not be able to grow. So in summary, the whole concept of industry 1, 2, 3.0, these structures have served us really well. And I'm not saying that they had its own time and relevance. All man to machine relationships, the way they were, that's fine. So we build this whole organization structures, processes to achieve scalable efficiency. But what you need today is to build organization for scalable learnings. You need to really go into the new world. How do you run a 21st century planet with a 20th century kind of an engine? But the key barrier here is that whenever, and this is my failure too, partly, and I want to really confess here with the larger team here, whenever you try to do a disruptive innovation in a big company, the immune system of the company will come and attack you. It's just like humans. Yeah. Organizations are designed to withstand the change or the risk that you have. So biggest risk is very hard-coded consciousness of leadership. And I think this is the first point I think Rajan made, and I totally echo that. People frame something new in their life with the current mental model. And if you can't break away from there, very, very big difference. So the greatest danger.
So if you were to become the CEO of Raymond's again, what would you change within, let's say, Raymond? I'm just taking Raymond as one example.
I think the first thing you need to do is really to really stop acting from yesterday's logic, because the turbulence is not the risk in itself. What is risky is to act with yesterday's logic. So you demand completely a new paradigm, a new mind, a new capability, because look, I think that we've learned to scale technology. Now we have to learn to scale an organization, and some of these tools that Alex talked do really help, whether strategy, structures, processes, cultures, KPI systems. I think you need to really have an ability to make a lifelong organization to a multi-stage organization. I think Amazon was a great example. Google is a great example. How do these people every 10 years reinvent themselves? And that, if you have to do, is a very big thing. At the only thing I have a point of difference with Alex, and this is the point I think, Venki, you raised, how do you change it? Alex did subscribe to the fact that when you do an innovation on the edge, which is this edge, and he took it up there, and then you transfer this whole innovation to the exploit stage from explore stage. I think that if you really do that, the corporate antibodies will kill even a $100 million idea, especially for multi-billion-dollar organizations. So should you transfer it, or should you make that itself a separate core and spin it off? I think you mentioned that. Spin it off into becoming a separate core for the organization. Like Amazon Web Service has nothing to do with Amazon Retail there. They have two different pivots of growth there. So that's the only point that I would like to just leave you with. And so this is basically, in some substance, I think what I would like to say is that there is a radical change required. I think that's starting with our mindset and the leadership competencies. Really.
Yeah. So I think we are almost out of time. We are right at the 4 o'clock mark. So what I'd request is, I'd request Alex to sum it up, and also, very quick reply to the question which I had, which is, Rajan is saying, let's go with very targeted, let's pick the areas that we innovate in, and let's place big bets. You're saying that, let's take multiple bets and then double down on the ones that are working. So how do you resolve that dilemma? If I'm a CEO, I'll say, should I listen to Rajan or should I listen to Alex?
So, let me take a quick step back.
Alex, are you there?
So who's the question for?
Alex, it's for you.
Okay.
The question is for you.
Okay. So let me just take a quick step back, because I think there's two stories I want to share. Because I think we're at a very critical stage of innovation. It's becoming a profession. People now know how to do it. So while I agree, with Rajan, of course it's about great people. But you don't say, oh, look, this guy has some talent. Let's going to invest in him. He's going to become a surgeon. You actually have to learn anatomy, and you have to learn physiology and do a lot of internships until you become a surgeon. So I think this is happening in innovation, right? So the frameworks per se are just frameworks, right? But think of it this way. So when I was surprised by the business model canvas starting to be used by millions of people. So I went to go ask people who built multi-billion-dollar businesses, hey, Steve Blank, you love these tools, you use them to teach. You didn't have them when you did it. And guess what the answer consistently is? I would have saved a lot of time, energy, and money if I had more structure and tools, right? So I would push back on what Rajan said very, very, a lot, because I think it's dangerous to say, oh, it's about great people. Of course it is. But guess what? It's like Roger Federer didn't wake up and become a great tennis player. So that's one story. Then the other story, related to both Rajan and Sanjay, I think the challenge is, indeed, the corporations are built to execute. So I talked to Ernest Q recently. So he's the CEO of Globe Telecom, the biggest Filipino telecom operator. And he was talking about this dual structure and how they actually first separated it completely. And that didn't work because they realized when it gets big enough, they actually need to use the supply chain of their existing business. So they also knew they can't integrate it because it would die. This is a mistake we see again and again and again. So what I find is a pity is that every corporation, because they're just focusing on, oh, great people, they're making exactly the same mistakes again and again and again. So we're burning a lot of energy and money because we're not using what we've learned, right? So we're at a time where innovation is not some kind of mystical thing just about creative geniuses. It still is, but it should be more. That's exactly the challenge, right? We now need to accept it's becoming a profession where you can learn it, and the best people will be even better because they're using tools. And that was my lesson that I took away, talking about, looking at the greatest companies, talking to the greatest CEOs, talking to the greatest entrepreneurs, and asking, Why the heck are you interested in these tools? You didn't need them. And the answer is always the same. This will allow us to systematically do these things that we've done with trial and error before. So I think it's a very exciting phase where both what Rajan and Sanjay said are absolutely, I agree with all of it. But now I think we have the answer. We have a lot of answers, and that's the cool thing. So I think we need to get more professional and accept we now know how to do most of these things. So let's do it systematically, because at the end of the day, and this is my last kind of thing, this will allow us to create more value for customers, more value for organizations, more value for the team members in a company, and ultimately, the only thing that matters, more value for society. So let's stop doing this in an ad hoc way and accept this can be a profession. And if we teach it well, we practice it well, just like we can become surgeons, we can become innovation surgeons. We're going to unlock a huge potential. And I think in particular, in a very, in an interesting economy like India, this can unlock potential like we've never seen before. So I think embracing tools and frameworks to get better is absolutely important, because they englobe the learning from the past. So let's become innovation surgeons and unlock the opportunity that's out there. It's fascinating what can be done.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. So what I'm hearing from you is basically that we need to move from innovation art to innovation as a science, to innovation as a part of every company's heartbeat and every company's processes. I think that's a great note on which to end this. I think we are about 5 minutes, 6 minutes over time, and I'd like to thank everybody who joined this particular session. Alex, thanks so much for not just giving this talk, but also making it very interactive. I wish this could have been a much longer talk, but it is what it is. For those who want to read more about Alex's work, his books are available. His website, Strategyzer.com, also has a number of free tools that you can download. I'd like to thank Rajan and Sanjay for joining us, and thanks everybody. And the link to this recording is also going to be available on YouTube. So I think on the iSpirit's website, iSpirit YouTube channel. So if you want to ever rewind and look at this video again, you could go to YouTube. So thanks, Alex. Thanks, Rajan. Thanks, Sanjay. And thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.